There's a switch inside your Gmail account right now, and there's a strong chance you never touched it. You didn't turn it on. You didn't get a clear warning. But somewhere between a software update and a routine sync, that switch was already sitting in the on position, quietly deciding whether an artificial intelligence gets to read the private conversations sitting in your inbox. Your medical results, your bank statements, your late-night messages to someone you love, your business contracts, your child's school forms, all of it, sitting inside a system that Google has now wired directly into one of the most powerful AI models on the planet. And here's the part that should genuinely unsettle you. Most people asking, is Gmail reading my emails, are already too late to the question because the reading has already started. This is not a hypothetical. This is not a conspiracy theory whispered in some corner of the internet. This is happening right now in 2026 to an estimated 1.8 billion Gmail accounts worldwide. And by the end of this video, you are going to know exactly what changed, why it changed, and how to shut it down in under a minute. Let's start with the official story, because every real investigation begins with what the powerful want you to believe. In January 2026, Google began rolling out what it called the Gemini era of Gmail to users across the United States. The pitch was framed around convenience. Gmail was becoming a personal, proactive inbox assistant, moving away from a simple chronological list of messages toward a prioritized overview built around Gemini 3, Google's newest AI model. On the surface, this sounds almost noble. Nobody enjoys digging through 300 unread emails to find the one plumber quote from 8 months ago. Nobody enjoys rereading a 40-message thread just to understand what was actually decided. Google says it is solving that problem for you. But here's where it gets worse. To solve that problem, the AI doesn't just glance at your inbox. It has to go inside it. It has to read the content. It has to understand the relationships between the people you talk to, the topics you discuss, the patterns in your behavior. And once you understand what that actually requires, the word convenience starts to sound a lot more like the word access. Think about what that means for a second. This new interface is called the AI Inbox. And according to Google's own product descriptions, it works like a personalized briefing system, surfacing your to-do items and catching you up on what matters by identifying VIP contacts based on how often you email them, who's in your contact list, and relationships. The AI infers directly from the content of your messages. Read that again. Relationships it infers from the content of your messages. That is not a filter sitting on top of your inbox. That is an intelligent system actively parsing the substance of your private conversations to build a model of your social and professional life. It is deciding who matters to you. It is deciding what counts as urgent. It is making judgment calls about your relationships based on data most of us assumed was locked away between two people and a server. And this is where everything changes, because the AI inbox is only one piece of a much larger structure. Sitting above it is a feature called AI Overview, which used to be something you had to manually switch on, but now appears automatically at the top of long email threads. That single change matters more than it looks. An opt-in feature becoming a default is not a small technical adjustment. It's a signal. It tells you which direction the company is moving, and it's not toward asking permission. It's toward assuming it. Once a feature graduates from optional to automatic, the burden shifts entirely onto you, the user, to notice it, understand it, and manually disable it before your data is already flowing through the system. Now, let's go deeper, because AI Overview is just the visible layer. Underneath it lives something far more consequential, something Google introduced in the same window of time under the name Personal Intelligence. On January 14th, 2026, Google activated this feature for its Gemini Assistant, giving it the ability to search across your Gmail, your Google Photos, your YouTube watch history, and your search activity in order to generate personalized answers. Think about the scale of that for a moment. This is not one AI reading one inbox. This is a single system with permission to cross-reference your emails against your photo library, your video watching habits, and every search query you've typed into Google for years. Google's own VP of the project described its purpose in terms of two core strengths: reasoning across complex sources of information and retrieving highly specific personal details. That means if you photographed your car's license plate 2 years ago, Gemini can now pull that number for you on request. It means your old email receipts can be cross-referenced with your travel history to reconstruct patterns about where you go, when you go there, and who you go with. This is not email summarization anymore. This is a behavioral map of your entire digital life, built and held by one company, accessible through a single AI system. But here's where it gets worse. Google's defenders will tell you this is opt-in, and technically they are correct. Personal Intelligence does not switch itself on by default. You have to manually activate it inside Gemini settings, and you retain some control over exactly which apps you connect, choosing Gmail without photos, for example, or the reverse. That sounds like a reasonable safeguard. But sit with this for a moment. The entire foundation of that safeguard rests on the assumption that ordinary users read settings menus carefully, understand the implications of vague toggle names, and proactively decline convenience features that promise to make their digital lives easier. History tells us that almost nobody does that. Convenience wins. It always wins. And once you understand that dynamic, you start to see opt-in not as a protection, but as a strategy, a way to technically preserve consent while betting correctly that the friction of understanding will keep most people clicking yes without ever reading the fine print. And then there is the detail that should genuinely stop you in your tracks. Google states plainly that your data does not need to travel anywhere new to power these AI features, because it already lives on Google's servers. Your information isn't being sent somewhere else, it's already there, and now the AI is simply being given permission to read it. Sit with that phrasing. Google is not saying, we built a new pipeline into your private life. Google is saying, we already had access to everything, and now we're activating a system that reads it. This is not a new intrusion. This is an old intrusion getting a new engine. Now, here is where the story stops being about features and starts being about power, because convenience features are optional in theory, but infrastructure is not, and what began as a set of toggles quietly hardened into something closer to default architecture. By late 2025, reports in a filed lawsuit alleged that Google's AI-powered smart features, the settings that allow Gemini to analyze private messages and attachments, were enabled by default for millions of users, rather than requiring explicit informed consent. Read that again. Not opt-in. Default. The scale is staggering. Across roughly 1.8 billion Gmail users worldwide, an unknown number may have had their private email content processed by Google's AI systems without ever consciously choosing that outcome, with many users reporting that when they finally checked their account settings, all three relevant AI toggles were already switched on, with no clear notification of when that had happened. This is not chaos. This is strategy. When a feature this significant rolls out silently, pre-enabled, buried 3 menus deep, that is not an accident of software design. That is a deliberate bet that friction protects adoption. The harder it is to find a setting, the more people simply live inside the default. And the default in this case was full AI access to the emotional, financial, and professional core of thousands of millions of human lives. The backlash was not silent. In November 2025, a proposed class action lawsuit was filed, alleging that Google secretly granted its Gemini AI access to private communications across Gmail, Chat, and Meet without proper notification or a genuine consent process, with the core legal argument centering on transparency, the claim that Google's implementation and its convoluted opt-out process may violate California's Invasion of Privacy Act. Think about what that lawsuit represents. This is not a fringe complaint from a handful of paranoid users. This is a formal legal challenge, arguing that one of the most powerful technology companies on Earth built a system that reads your private messages by default and made it deliberately difficult to turn off. And as of the reporting, Google had not issued a public response to the lawsuit, even as user confusion and frustration continued to spread across social media. So what do you actually have to do to protect yourself? This is where the story gets even more revealing, because the answer is not simple. It is not one switch. According to the reporting, achieving genuine protection requires disabling 3 separate settings scattered across different menus. First, smart features in Gmail, Chat, and Meet, which governs whether Google can use your content to power its assistant tools. Second, smart features in Google Workspace, the setting that grants Gemini the ability to summarize your content. And third, smart features in other Google products, which extends your data's use across Google's broader ecosystem for suggestions and recommendations. And critically, after switching off the first setting, you then have to navigate into a separate Manage Workspace Smart Features menu, just to find and disable the remaining 2. This is not an accident of interface design. A single, clearly labeled master switch would have been trivial to build. Instead, the architecture spreads protection across multiple hidden layers, and that structure ensures a large percentage of users who try to opt out will give up halfway through or simply never find the second and third toggles at all. Now think about the wider picture forming around this, because Gmail is not operating in isolation. Around the same period, Google quietly introduced a new default setting called Search Services History, which collects a wide range of user activity, including media and interaction data, specifically to help train and improve Google's generative AI systems. This setting, according to reporting, is enabled by default for most users across the globe, and it functions by collecting information from Google's search services, including images, audio, video recordings, files, and general interaction patterns, feeding all of it into the models that power tools like Gemini. This is the moment the picture stops being about one product and becomes about an entire ecosystem quietly rewiring itself around AI training. Your searches, Your media, your inbox, all converging into the same machine. And here's the part that deserves real scrutiny because Google's public messaging tries very hard to draw a clean line that may not be as clean as it sounds. Google insists that it does not train its foundational AI models, including Gemini itself, on the actual content of users' personal emails, and states that this content remains private, with Gemini in Gmail not retaining email data after processing it. On paper, that is reassuring. But notice the precision of that language. Not, we don't read your emails. Not, we don't process your emails. Specifically, we don't train our foundational models on your emails, and we don't retain the data afterward. That distinction matters enormously because reading without retaining is still reading. Processing without training is still processing. The AI still has to open the private room, look around, understand what's inside, generate its answer, and then, according to Google, leave and forget everything. Whether you find that reassuring or unsettling depends entirely on how much trust you're willing to extend to a company whose entire business model has historically run on understanding as much about you as technologically possible. Gmail's own product director tried to put a human face on this exact tension. Blake Barnes, the product director for Gmail, addressed the concern directly, describing the experience of inviting Gemini into your inbox as being a bit like inviting it into a private room where your inbox lives, insisting that when Gemini is finished, it leaves the room, and along with it, every piece of information related to your inbox evaporates, so that Gemini never learns your secrets, and that you remain safe and protected within the inbox itself. It's a vivid metaphor, deliberately designed to be comforting. A guest who visits, helps you, and then walks out the door remembering nothing. But metaphors are not audits. A metaphor cannot be independently verified by a user sitting at home, and when a company's product director is publicly working this hard to reassure people, that itself tells you something about how much concern already exists among the very users they are trying to keep. Even Google's own leadership has struggled to give a fully clean answer under direct questioning. When asked point blank whether Google uses private emails to train the Gemini model, Barnes gave a short answer, no. But the framing of that response, a short, clipped denial rather than an expansive, detailed explanation, left many privacy-conscious observers feeling that there was more complexity sitting just beneath the surface of that single word. A one-word denial to a question this significant is not the same as transparency. It's the minimum viable answer. And in an era where trust in large technology companies is already fragile, minimum viable answers tend to generate maximum public suspicion. Now here is where the geography of this story becomes genuinely strategic. Because protection from these AI systems is not distributed equally across the world. Users in the European Union, the United Kingdom, and Japan benefit from meaningfully stricter privacy protections by default, while American users remain far more exposed to this kind of data collection. In fact, by default, these AI features are switched off entirely for people located in the European Economic Area, Switzerland, the United Kingdom, and Japan, specifically because of the stricter privacy regulations enforced in those regions. And for users in those regions, Gmail prompts them to explicitly activate the features themselves the first time they try to use them. Think about what that tells you. This is not a company that lacks the technical ability to build a genuinely privacy-respecting, explicit opt-in system worldwide. They already built one. They already deployed it. It already exists, right now, live, protecting millions of users in Europe and Japan. They simply chose not to extend that same level of protection to users in the United States and most of the rest of the world. That is not a technical limitation. That is a business decision, and it draws a hard line between users whose governments forced better protection into existence and users who are left to fend for themselves. This is where the story escalates into something bigger than one product, because Gmail was never the only front in this quiet expansion. Around the same period, Chrome, the world's most widely used web browser, was found to be silently downloading a 4 GB Gemini Nano AI model directly onto users' devices, according to a privacy researcher who discovered the deployment happening with no consent prompt, no notification, and no straightforward way to stop it. Think about the pattern forming here. Not a single controversial feature in a single product, but a recurring behavior across an entire company's product line. Powerful AI capability, deployed quietly, defaulted on, with the burden of discovery and removal placed entirely on the user. Google's response framed the situation as a misunderstanding, with the company stating that on-device AI is core to its developer and security strategy, and that it has offered this lightweight on-device model since 2024 to power important capabilities like on-device scam detection without sending user data to the cloud. That explanation may well be technically accurate, but accuracy is not the same as adequate communication. And when a 4 GB AI model appears silently on your device without a single prompt asking your permission, "It's for your own good" is a very difficult message to deliver convincingly after the fact rather than before it. So where does that leave you, the person sitting in front of your inbox right now, wondering what is actually true? Let's separate the confirmed facts from the noise, because this story has generated plenty of both. It is confirmed that Gmail's AI features, powered by Gemini, do process the content of your emails to generate summaries, suggested replies, and prioritized inboxes. It is confirmed that some of these settings have shipped enabled by default for large numbers of users, particularly in the United States. It is confirmed that a formal lawsuit alleges Google failed to obtain proper consent before activating some of these capabilities. It is confirmed that disabling full protection requires navigating multiple separate settings, not one simple switch. And it is also confirmed, at least according to Google's own public statements, that the company does not use the content of your personal emails to train its core AI models, and that Gemini does not retain your inbox data once it finishes processing a specific request. Both of those things can be true simultaneously. A system can be built with genuine technical safeguards around data retention and training, while still being deployed in a way that prioritizes adoption over informed consent. Trust and technical design are two separate questions, and this story sits squarely at the intersection of both. Here's where it gets worse before it gets better. Even privacy-conscious competitors are exploiting this moment to make their case. Proton Mail, a privacy-focused email provider, has directly criticized the rollout, stressing that the underlying Gmail feature was switched on without genuine user consent, and using the controversy to actively invite frustrated Gmail users to migrate their email entirely to Proton's platform instead. Whether or not you trust a competitor's motives in a moment like this, their argument points toward the same underlying tension: the difference between a company that builds privacy protection into its default architecture and a company that builds convenience into its default architecture and leaves privacy as something you have to go looking for. So let's get practical. Because knowing the story means nothing if you leave this video without knowing exactly what to do. According to the security guidance being circulated by multiple independent outlets, protecting yourself requires action on two separate fronts. On mobile, inside the Gmail app, you open the three-line menu, go into Settings, select your account, and manually uncheck Smart Features and Personalization. On desktop, the path runs through Settings, into the General tab, down to Google Workspace Smart Features, where you click Manage and find toggles labeled Smart Features in Google Workspace and Smart Features in other Google products, both of which need to be switched off if you want your content excluded from broader personalization and AI processing. From there, it's worth going a step further into your Google account's data and privacy section, checking activity controls, and making sure you're genuinely comfortable with what continues to be shared even after those core toggles are disabled. And if you use the standalone Gemini app on your phone, don't stop there either. Check its own dedicated settings for features like personal context and apps activity, since newer, separate controls exist specifically for how Gemini connects to your other Google services outside of Gmail itself. One important caveat before you rush to disable everything. Google has been explicit that you cannot selectively keep some AI upgrades while rejecting others. The system is not designed to let you dip in and out. If you disable smart features, you lose access to the new AI capabilities entirely. And Google maintains that all of these features are optional, with users remaining fully in control, even as it acknowledges that many of these settings are likely enabled by default, meaning you do have to actively take action if you want them off. That single admission is worth sitting with. A company telling you in the same breath that you are in control and that the system was probably already switched on before you ever touched it. And this is where the deeper question emerges, the one that goes beyond toggles and settings menus entirely. This situation represents one of the largest privacy policy implementations in recent technology history, and the implications reach far beyond email itself. Because what's happening inside your Gmail account is really a preview of a much larger shift happening across the entire technology landscape. AI systems are being woven directly into the infrastructure of daily digital life, not as optional add-ons you seek out and install, but as background processes quietly activated inside tools you already use every single day. Tools you trust by habit rather than by active, ongoing evaluation. Email, browsers, photo libraries, search history, voice assistants. Each one individually framed as a small convenience. Collectively, they form something much larger, a continuous cross-platform intelligence layer sitting on top of nearly everything you do online, built by a small number of companies with enormous incentive to know as much about you as they possibly can. So here is the real question this story leaves behind, and it's not simply, should I turn off smart features in Gmail? It's this. In a world where convenience and surveillance increasingly wear the exact same interface, wrapped in the exact same friendly product language, how many of these systems have you already said yes to without realizing it? How many Smart features sitting inside your phone, your browser, your email, your photo library are quietly reading, cross-referencing, and building a model of your life at this very moment. Google insists the choice remains yours, but a choice you never knowingly made is not really a choice at all. It's a default you inherited. The lawsuits are still moving through the courts. The regulatory gap between Europe, Japan, and the United States is not closing on its own, and Google continues rolling these systems out to more of its 1.8 billion Gmail users every single week. The technology is not slowing down. The question is whether the people using it will ever fully understand what they've agreed to before the next default arrives, and whether, by the time most of us notice, there will be anything left to opt out of at all.